Dear brothers and sisters, siblings, members of the tribe, siblings of the covenants, Chag Sameach, Good Yontif, Shana Tova. I hope you have found your place. First of all, quite literally, I hope you have found a good place, a good seat. I know that for many of us, re-entering this space after 2.5 years can feel unusual, strange, or daunting, as well as nostalgic, comforting, and exciting. There is no right or wrong answer. We may wonder where our friends and family are sitting. Our minds turn to the dinners you have enjoyed or will still enjoy, what the new year will bring, and most importantly, whether the not just the honey cake oneg will be worth the wait. I want to open my sermon by sharing how delighted and happy I am to see so many of you here, to spend time with you at the drinks reception, to welcome you back into our communal home, to greet you with celebratory balloons out in the lobby, and to ground us in the melodies and the poetry of the season. My first response is one of overwhelming gratitude. Our world is still sundered since those fateful early months of 2020, but our community, while protecting each other, is stitching itself back together again. I am grateful to the lay leaders and volunteers and my colleagues in the office who have made our communal life possible, for your continued generous support of our Jewish community, for your friendship and connection and presence. We are in a different place today than we were 2 high holiday seasons ago, or even last year. And at the same time, there is a lot to process about the place where we find ourselves. I'd say there's no better time than to take stock. The theme for this high holiday season is back to basics. The Shemitah, the sabbatical year ends, and the Hachel, the gathering year, begins, very apropos. We are starting to feel out the contours of this new normal. It's okay to be a little rusty, to be pulled between yearning and questioning, to reevaluate the presence of Jewish wisdom, spirituality, and community in our lives. Back to basics means that we will go back to school, friends. We will revisit the classic themes of the high holidays and place them in the stark, bright light of this new world. In 5783, let's get ourselves a chance to fall in love with each other again. So for our theme, I can't do this with my hands, but for our theme, imagine a Star of David with interlocking triangles, each point corresponding to a key concept, very Rosenzweigian. We will look at the 3 core elements of the liturgy: Malchuyot, sovereignties, Zichronot, remembrances, and Shofarot, blasts. You can find all of these in the Musaf service of Rosh HaShanah and Yom Kippur. We will also look at the 3 core principles of the high holidays, as they are iterated in Untanet Hoke: Teshuvah, return to our true selves; Tefillah, prayerful contemplation; and Tzedakah, righteous recalibration. Malchuyot, Zichronot, and Shofarot represent the thrust of our collective history, its arc hopefully bending towards justice. Teshuvah, Tefillah, and Tzedakah represent the inner transformation of each of us. For these 10 days, we embrace these sacred practices. We recognize that we all have the potential for change, the invitation to inner deepness, and the passion to give of ourselves in a world that needs our righteous balancing. We see through the crisscrossing patterns of this imagined universe that this big story of Malchuyot, Zichronot, Shofarot is actualized through the smaller stories of each of our Teshuvah, Tefillah, and Tzedakah. We are the pieces of our own puzzle, a fractal of divinity, bringing together the broken parts of the world. So some of the questions that we will be exploring these 10 days together come out of these ideas and are both age-old and ever relevant. Malchuyot, why do the high holidays matter? Teshuvah, how do we begin to fix ourselves? Zichrono, when we need a reminder of all we are. Tefillah, where do we turn to be resold? Tzedakah, what does the world need from us? Shofarot, who will we be in the future? Our starting point for tonight is Malchuyot, the sovereignty of the divine. And I know that is just going to be such a crowd pleaser here, starting off with some hefty theology. So granted, it's not an easy start. We have to do a little front loading before we get to the good stuff. But I promise you it will be worth it. Some of you may have heard or read my 3-week sermon series in Elul of the last number of weeks that explored different Jewish ways to understand God. 1, through developing theological literacy, irrespective of personal belief. 2, through the ethical principles embedded in monotheism, again, irrespective of personal belief. And 3, through the personal experience of the divine, not as a dictator in the sky, but through the soft power of persuasion and transformation. And you can find all of these 3 sermons on the synagogue website, so feel free to check those out. Tonight's sermon will continue that line of inquiry. Why is it compelling for us moderns living in a democracy, still a democracy, right? Just checking, to imagine God as sovereign? What can we learn from the monarchical imagery when so many of us struggle with any conception of God, let alone such a vertical one? The Malchuyot service in the Machzor is nothing less than a liturgical reenactment of a coronation ritual, but with some subversive twists. After all, on Rosh HaShanah, we proclaim God as Melech al Kol Haaretz, sovereign of all the world. Take, for example, the Aleinu, which we normally sing to a jaunty tune, vaguely reminiscent of Itsy Bitsy Spider. Shehu Noteh Shamayim v'yoset haaretz. I ruined it for you. This regular Aleinu is a derivative of the great Aleinu, which originally comes from the Sacred Heart of the Musaf service on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Medieval Ashkenazim loved the prayer so much that they adopted it for daily worship. But originally it was intended to be enthroned in glory, splendor, and high drama at the crescendo of our Musaf worship. That's the point. But what is the point of this archaic 2,000-year-old prayer? The prayer affirms the classical tenets of Jewish monotheism, the belief in one God or less. Actually, no, that's not what the Machzor says, but if you want to pencil that in the margins, feel free to do that. Hu Eloheinu, Ein Od, Emet Malkeinu, Efes Zulato, or in the memorable tune of Itsy Bitsy Spider, Hu Eloheinu, Ein Od, Emet Malkeinu. Thank you. Translated, this means, this is our God, none else. Ours is the true sovereign. There is no other. Like I said, one God or less. This boldly universalist proclamation teeters on the totalitarian if we do not ground it in an ethos of religious pluralism. Also, if God is the true sovereign, then what does that make of earthly rulers? A more subversive piyut, a more subversive hymn, may offer us a hint. These meditations on Malchuyot, again, you can find them in the Musaf service, ascribe a number of moral characteristics to the divine. God, and I quote, God speaks with righteousness, is clothed in justice, listens to those who cry out, is good, perceives all that is hidden, gives speech to the mute, never sleeps, holds out a treasured reward for the righteous. It sounds like God's mom. Especially the never sleeping part, right? This is, of course, a human projection of all we want God to be. And perhaps during these 10 days, we can at least momentarily suspend, just a little bit, suspend this belief and be open to the possibility that the divine mystery is some of those things. Divine virtue is a mirror that reflects our expectations for the moral character of human beings. Shouldn't we speak with righteousness, be just, listen to the oppressed, be good and kind and perceptive while empowering the disempowered and rewarding the just? Sounds like our job description. Monarchical imagery in our tradition isn't just a hangover from an earlier era. It is a principle of moral self-governance for the human family. This text then takes an unexpected turn. I liked this bit. Quote, the impoverished earthly sovereign, it's quite a good insult, isn't it? You impoverished earthly sovereign. Is chased by exhaustion, falls into a deep sleep, and is enveloped in chaos. How long can that rule last? Human, end quote, human frailty and moral indifference is set as a counterpoint to the benevolence of the divine. This medieval text, and it's relevant that this is a medieval text. This medieval text is courageous for calling out the frailty and fallibility of human monarchs. The human ruler, prone to greed and power, is placed in their proper context. Through our worship of God, we guarantee that we do not worship powerful human beings of flesh and blood. So, how can these powerful metaphors call us to connection and meaning here and now? I've been here long enough, 5 years in total, to know that for Americans, the monarchical idea is a strange one. For me, having grown up with and lived under constitutional monarchies in Europe, it may be an easier concept to grasp. As we know, the monarchical image has been in the news a lot lately. We've seen the pageantry of Queen Elizabeth's passing. Who of you, raise your hand if you've watched or read about all the smells and bells in Queen Elizabeth's passing, right? Yes, Americans love royal gossip. As the ceremony and circumstance of her funeral unfolded, a nation clung to ancient and often incomprehensible ritual, anchoring itself in the silent, unspoken wisdom of ancient tradition. Sounds familiar. Sounds familiar with what we're doing for the high holidays here. Actually, the Q alone, who knew about the Q? The Q got its own Twitter account. The Q got its own YouTube channel. This Q to see the Queen lie in state, right? This Q became its own sensation. The Q alone became a pilgrimage as people waited in line for hours, if not days, to pay their respects to the deceased queen. And the senior editor of The Atlantic, David Frum, brings his political perspective to the myth and meaning of the British monarchy. I quote, "The British stumbled upon an unexpectedly powerful idea. Sever the symbolism of the state from the political power of the state and bestow those two different governing roles on two different people. Power has little majesty in the British system. People are rude to prime ministers all the time. Their colleagues can give them the boot, as just they did to Boris Johnson. Meanwhile, the person who gets the palaces, the bowing and the scraping and the bands and the guards, gets nothing else. The British monarch is both the head of state and that state's most closely watched prisoner, forbidden to say or do anything remotely human, let alone political. That is why Queen Elizabeth II was admired and loved, end quote. While we could argue about his observation regarding power, I do think he has identified something important about what made the late Queen a moral exemplar. Not necessarily by virtue of her character or by virtue of the British state and its empire, but because the source of her majesty in a constitutional monarchy was precisely not its power. Had the monarchy wedded itself to raw power, as in days of yore, let's not forget that she sunsetted an empire, then it would have inspired fear, not to a large degree reverence. A contemporary constitutional monarch is assessed on what they represent, both the continuity and the containment of power, a collective identity, an appeal to the transcendent nature of the human condition, a poetic quality to what otherwise might be unadorned privilege. Sometimes, even the most rational and modern human beings want to be moved by experiences they may not fully understand or even agree with. Is it not any different for us? Stepping away from Queen Elizabeth. Perhaps Malchuyo is less about power and more about persuasion. In one of my aforementioned Elul sermons, we looked at a branch of theology called process theology, where God is conceived not as coercively intervening into human affairs, but gently nudging us to choose the right path through so-called lures. On face value, there is a lot of vertical interventionist imagery in this book. God as king and father and judge and sealer. Yet, if we delve deeper into the heart of those ideas, we might be surprised at how much agency Judaism gives us. The Unatana Tokef, despite its reputation, allows us to pivot from our doom. But repentance and prayer and righteous giving overcomes the evil decree. There is the suggestion that we can actually thwart God's decree. Second, there is the suggestion that God's decree may not be agreeable. If we are to pledge uncritical fealty to God, then how dare we criticize God's decree by calling it evil? Yet that is the refreshing part. We get to argue, struggle, push back, renegotiate, disagree, disbelieve. This is quintessentially Jewish. In this season of majesty and mystery, we peel away the layers in our own soul, our own complex feelings and ambivalences, and we peel away the layers of our tradition. Rabbi Eli Comfort, in the High Holiday anthology, All the World, Universalism, Particularism, and the High Holidays, that's a book edited by Rabbi Larry Hoffman, highly recommend. Rabbi Comfort calls the God of Avinu Malkeinu the Un-King. Interesting, right? The Un-King. He argues that, I quote, in order to be ruler, God actually needs people to rule over. Rosh HaShanah is the day in which this crowning happens because it is the anniversary of the creation of humans. In other words, the covenant between the divine sovereign and humanity. End quote. Sorry, end quote. I'm in a university town. I should know how to do this. In other words, the covenant between the divine sovereign and humanity is not like that of a decidedly human authoritarian. Instead, the voluntarism of the covenant is not dissimilar from the democratic voluntarism of a constitutional monarchy. The irony, Rabbi Comfort writes, the irony is that the authors of the liturgy were similarly turned off by the image of a king. In short, God, the supreme king, is the opposite of everything we know about kings. If you don't like kings, you are in good company. The God of rabbinic literature is the un-king king. This paradox, end quote, sorry. This paradox is tricky to unpack, but it helps to understand through the lens of power. Symbology has meaning as long as it is rooted in morality. Malchuyot is not about a dictatorship of heaven, quite the opposite. Malchuyot is about thoughtfully inhabiting the monarchical metaphor as long as it is interwoven with divine virtue and not with raw power. Through God's sovereignty, we affirm the sovereignty and agency in each human being created in God's image. Roll into one, it is both a conservative and a radical image. The paradox is that God does not rest on the power that God accords to God's self, but rather on the meaning we are willing to invest in the divine. And it is through this quest of meaning that we are encouraged to find our place in the greater whole. And I think that is the secret of this liturgy. And I think that is the secret of Malchuyot. It is a metaphor, an ancient one, that steers us to find our place in the greater whole. For any of us who have seen the majesty of the Webb's telescope, Cosmic Imaginings, this greater whole can feel both vast and intimate. This is the paradox of Avinu Malkeinu, of this dichotomy in our liturgy. God is supposed to feel as close to us as a parent's forgiving embrace, and distant like a ruler on the throne. We witness the deep field of countless stars and galaxies, each a secret unto itself, and that paradox of distance and intimacy dances within us too, giving rise to a profound sense of awe. The high holidays, Yamim Noraim, days of awe, help us attain greatness through our smallness, touch infinity through our mortality, align us with truth and turn away from falsehood, to embrace goodness and cast aside evil, lifting us out of the drudgery or petty concerns of our ordinary lives. The high holidays invite us into taking a truly cosmic perspective,